Okay, so welcome again to this is the third in our series of UNO OER and Affordable Content Adopter chats with faculty members from UNO who have gone through the Affordable Content Grants program here and have worked on various disciplines. So today, for the afternoon session, I'm super excited because we're going to be talking with a couple faculty. Kevin and Miles are with us who teach writing, and they teach in the Writers Workshop at UNO. And this is an area that I feel like is less commonly engaged with for these kinds of projects than some other disciplines, just because of the nature of creative work and it being less likely to be an area in which you're going to find a lot of Creative Commons licensed resources. And so I think these are projects that require a lot of kind of outside the box thinking and kind of creative solutions when you're doing these kind of things. So, and whoever wants to go first, but Kevin and Miles, would you like to introduce yourselves, what you teach, and talk a little bit about the project that you did for the Affordable Content Grants?
Sure. My name is Miles Waggener. I coordinate the BFA in writing program in the School of the Arts, and I teach primarily poetry, but I have taught some gen ed courses or service courses, I don't know the right term for this, in our unit, primarily creative writing for the arts, and then introduction to creative writing. And I also teach autobiographical reading and writing, which is an English course through the Thompson Learning Community. And my project was to develop is affordable content not the right term? Craig, is it the wrong term to use? Okay,
no.
affordable content syllabi for those three courses. And it came from in a section of autobiographical reading and writing. A large percentage of those students in that class, they're Buffett scholars, they're first generation students. They didn't buy the book. I maybe had 2 books that were required, and they didn't have the resources to buy the books. And they were used books. They weren't that expensive, but it still was a burden for a lot of the students. And so I said, I'm going to convert that class to this. And then the creative writing courses, I'm like, well, if I can do that one, I can probably find resources in the respective genres taught in a writing workshop for the 3,500 and 1,500 creative writing for the arts and intro to creative writing. So that's the project that I did.
Kevin, I'll jump in now. I'm Kevin Clouther. I'm an associate professor of fiction in the Writers Workshop. I work with Miles there. I also direct the MFA in writing, which is our low residency graduate program in creative writing here at UNO. And I received a grant for 3 of our undergraduate fiction writing studios that operate under one course, the intermediate fiction studio and 2 of the advanced fiction studios. Those 3 courses are all taught together in the same time and at the same place. And the idea here was to not create a course without books, but to create a course where the cost of books was low. And so for this class, the cost of books was approximately $30. And so students didn't spend $30 if they bought them new, a little bit less if they bought them used. And that was important to me because, Miles and I and the other people who are teaching creative writing here at the university, we're in the bookmaking business. That's what our research and creative activity consists of. Writing stories, writing poems, writing essays, and then eventually collecting them into books. And so I did want students to have physical books in the class, and I wanted them to come away from the class with books. But I was certainly sensitive to the budgets that students are on and understanding that they might not have a lot of money for books. And so every text the students read outside of those 2 books that they purchased was made available to them for free online, and the gathering space for all of these texts predictably was Canvas. And to sort of get to the initial question of how to gather these texts, I didn't find that it was terribly difficult. Actually, there's a lot of content that's available for free online. The canonical stuff is easier to find than the contemporary stuff because everything published before 1925 or so, changes every year, is part of the public domain. And there are a lot of websites that reliably gather and edit those texts to make sure that they're reputable. And so if you're teaching a text that's published before 1925 or so, there's a good chance that you can find the text online. And if you're doing something in translation, you just have to make sure that the translation is also part of the public domain, because you could have a text that was published in the late 19th century, for example, but if the translation was done in the late 20th century, the early 21st century, it's not going to be in the public domain. And so for the canonical stuff, it wasn't too difficult. For the contemporary materials, they're for short stories, a lot of content is available in places like Harper's Magazine, The New Yorker, Electric Literature, and there are paywalls for sites like The New Yorker and Harper's, but they also have material that's available that's not behind a paywall. So it was a matter of selecting texts that students would be able to access without having to worry about a paywall, and then putting all of those contemporary and canonical texts in one place in Canvas so that students would just have to click on them in order to be able to access them. And then there are various other texts that I made available to students too, but I'm sure we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah. And so yeah, to add some context for people watching either now or asynchronously later, so the affordable content grants that are managed by Chris Library at UNO, they fund the labor of either conversion of courses into what we either tag in the system as no cost or low cost being less than $40. So it's not a strictly OER grants program, because that's just not feasible for all disciplines, and the $40 cutoff is pretty standard in higher ed. You touched on a few of the questions that I actually had lined up, and so one that I wanted to get into, and I'll go ahead and ask both of you while it's at the front of my brain, and then we can get back to sort of more finding materials. But so you mentioned being able to provide links to stories, to essays, to writing, right, that's being hosted elsewhere and is not behind a paywall. So when it comes to, do you have time then kind of set aside before the beginning of each semester for link checking to make sure that these things are still up, or do you do that week by week, just kind of before that week's lectures?
Yeah. So what I do with Canvas is each time I create a new course on Canvas, I make sure that the links are active, and the students are doing something, even though this particular class that I'm talking about, even though that class meets face to face, the students are doing something on Canvas every week. They're responding to writing prompts, they're reading texts, they're posting things for comment. And so in the event that a link is broken or there's a paywall or something like that, student will always let me know, and it can be quickly addressed. But each time I teach the course, I essentially design the course anew. And so in that way, I make sure that the links are all active. And I'm also linking to various sources within the university and through Chris Library. And so they are leaving Canvas to go to, say the New Yorker or Project Gutenberg, but they're also leaving Canvas to go to various sites in Chris Library.
That's the lion's share of the resources that I found were through the library, or Chris Library. Although for poetry, the really the most important resource was the Academy of American Poets. I can build a much better anthology of poetry from various traditions just from that site alone. And I have not taught these courses using the syllabi that I've developed. I've not had a chance to teach the 3 courses using the syllabi from the grant. But I have used a number of the links in other classes that I've taught, and it's come in handy.
Yeah, so for some additional kind of context here, the reason why I think a lot of these kinds of courses receive as a whole, as a discipline, less frequent engagement than some other disciplines is because and like especially in STEM and a lot of the social sciences, you're going to find a lot of Creative Commons licensed materials. But if you're assigning poetry, if you're assigning fiction, if you're assigning creative nonfiction, right? Now, yes, it could be in the public domain, as Kevin said, and that's a huge resource. But you're with creative work, you're less likely to find work that creatives have produced and then placed into the public domain. Than say, well, actually, so this morning, as an example, we were chatting with Steffi Jasso, who teaches psychology, and she was pointing out that, you know, if you do a search for like intro to psychology materials in an OER capacity, you're kind of just at this point buried in an avalanche, right? The problem is there's way too much initially to make sense of, and so you've got a lot of synthesis to do and a lot of reading to do, which is probably kind of the opposite problem that people have when they're trying to teach creative areas. So Miles, were you also able to use public domain materials in the same way that Kevin was?
I think so, if I understand it correctly. Yes. There were some. I can't remember what it was. I'm kind of. It's been a while ago. There was something. It was a resource, a search resource that you showed me in the library, and I was able to find, say, like an anthology of creative nonfiction, like very short creative nonfiction, and that was welcome because that was the hardest genre to find, and a lot of what I tried to build, I tried to find thematically or based on units. Mm-hmm. And that was a lot. That was very time consuming. Just trying to find. I'm trying to think of a certain kind of lyric essay, and find examples of that certain kind of lyric essay, or find a monologue essay, or a braided essay. It was difficult to find something that would be, I could turn to the anthologies that I've taught over the years and find those texts, but I couldn't. It was very difficult. I had to like read until finally I found some. I have to read through some affordable content anthologies in which had examples of that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, it sounds like then, like, you've got to obviously make a lot of use of existing knowledge for both of you that you had as far as writers, pieces, works that you have used or that would be good, and then what then as you were getting into it, what seemed to be, was it just sort of a lot of repetitive Googling a lot of the time just to try to find examples and try to find something that wasn't behind a paywall that you could use?
Well, I had 2 very, very productive meetings with you, Greg.
Yeah.
And we knocked out some things that were there were some things I was really struggling with. And I think we both looked at resources together, and we were trying to find things there. So that was, if I could give one piece of advice, is use Mr. Finlay as much as you can. Very, very helpful.
We find things professionally, so yeah, we just but thank you for that. I'm glad it was productive. It's always good to have a happy outcome. And we don't big up ourselves enough in the library. It's true. We aren't good at that. So thank you. Kevin, was it kind of similar with you then? Did you sort of have kind of a suite of materials in mind through your own experience and your own knowledge base that you could use as sort of like a touchstone, and then find similar pieces if none of those were readily available?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was sort of exciting because what I have historically done is assign books where the materials were curated by somebody else, either an editor or, a collection or multiple collections by a single author. And so for this process, I was basically the editor doing my own curating. And it's not difficult to find the canonical material on Project Gutenberg or a site like that. The contemporary material is a little bit more difficult to find because so much of it is behind a paywall. But there's so much great stuff out there. If there was something that was behind a paywall, I just pivoted and found something else. And I think it also empowered me to bring in some authors and voices that I might not have otherwise, because I was able to think to myself, all right, well, who has historically been marginalized vis-a-vis these anthologies, and how can I sort of address that by selecting some text that I've admired or appreciated in the past. So I found that process kind of exciting, and even without I did this with the grant last semester. But then this semester I just did it again because I liked it. And so much of it was able to carry over. And so what I had done with the grant in fall of 2023, I just did without a grant for spring of 2024 because I liked how it worked. And, a lot of this stuff translates from one Canvas course to another, not just the design, but some of the materials that Chris Library has done for us. So, for example, Tammy Owens created a very useful writer's workshop research guide that can easily be used across multiple Canvas courses. I found a website called Resources and Creative Writing Studies that was a companion to a print text, but the online sources are all available for free. So I now use that in multiple Canvas courses. And the Oxford English Dictionary, which Chris Library pays for that subscription, that's something that we integrate into the course, and I make it as easy as possible for students to log into that. Tell them, don't just look up a word on your phone, and certainly don't use a thesaurus because you'll oftentimes find the exact wrong word. Just go to the Oxford English Dictionary and you'll find all sorts of different ways of thinking about the word there, but you'll also have an understanding of how the word is changed across time. And so sometimes in class, if there's a word that somebody finds particularly interesting, we just look it up in the Oxford English Dictionary and sort of study where it came from and how it's changed over time. And they know how to do all this stuff because it's all on the Canvas page. So they can do it themselves. They can pull out their phone or a tablet or a laptop and just look that stuff up while we're talking about something else in class.
You mentioned that you were able to sort of integrate voices into the course that hadn't been, right? Can you do any examples come to mind immediately as I'm putting you on the spot of kind of what that?
Yeah. So we led last semester with this great story by Danielle Evans, who's a Black author. And the story is called Changing Moms on the New Jersey Turnpike. And it's a story that explores both race and class from a perspective that I haven't seen in a lot of the anthologies that I've read and assigned before. And it's new. Danielle Evans is a practicing writer, teaches out at Johns Hopkins, I think. But she's relatively young, and she's publishing fiction now. Her stories are coming out now, and so that story has been out for a little while, but not forever. And typically a story's been out for a while before it's anthologized, and so that's just not something that I think would have shown up in a syllabus before. But the students really liked it, and I give them an assignment where they have to write a craft paper, critical paper on one of the authors that they read on the syllabus. They can pick the book by the author, and they can pick the author. And I know that Danielle Evans story went over well, because people wrote their craft papers on Danielle Evans' story collections. And so one of the other things that this grant gave me the idea to do was to sort of incentivize the students going into Chris Library and actually picking a book off the shelf, which a lot of them, more than I might have guessed, had never done before. And so as part of that craft paper assignment, what I did was I gave them a list of about a dozen books that were on the shelf in Chris Library, books by authors who were on the syllabus. And I gave them the call number, and I said, go up to the third floor and check this book out of the library. That way you won't have to buy it. Here's the call number. It'll be easy enough for you to do. And of course, when they go up there, they see that there are all sorts of other books by those authors. And, hopefully that sort of introduces them to the library in a way that they might not have been introduced previously. Now, if I was teaching the course asynchronously or remotely, I don't know that I would give that assignment. But because I was teaching the course face-to-face, it seemed like a reasonable enough thing to do. And I think that's pretty much what every student did. I think pretty much every student went to the library and pulled a book off the shelf, as opposed to buying it on Amazon or finding it some other way.
And conversely, like having completed the grant and developed the syllabi for the courses that I mentioned, I was able to discover a lot of ebooks of poetry collections. And so I have this long list of ebooks that I give to the advanced poetry students in the BFA program. So it's having completed the grant has enhanced my teaching of the other courses. And that's a really easy, because they have a craft talk component in that class, and I have to I make, as Kevin said, I make them go to the library and check out books up in the PSs and the PRs, but that long list of ebooks has been very useful for students in that particular assignment.
And then Miles, did you also kind of have that experience then where you ended up using works by authors who probably wouldn't have been included in the sort of like off-the-shelf anthologies if you're using like the best American essays 2024, etc.?
Well, I mean, the Yale Poetry Prize used to be called the Yale Younger. The Chris Library has all of them. They're most of them, many of them, but they're ebooks, and they've been and the judge for that prize for a long time. More recently, it was Carl Phillips, who's just fantastic queer Black poet who's been selecting like a lot of poets of color, a lot of poets who are not represented in the anthologies that have been taught for years and years in creative writing courses. And so that was fantastic to find.
I want to talk about course design a little bit, right? Because you've got obviously like your learning objectives and your learning outcomes. But as you are kind of cobbling together, and as Kevin said, you effectively curating your own anthology here, did you find that affected the flow of the course, the schedule of what you were teaching? Did that stay pretty much the same, or did you end up doing some customization of the schedule and kind of what you teach and when you teach to lead into those learning objectives and outcomes?
If I could go first, I have yet to teach the 3 courses that I have developed new syllabi for. So I have to recuse myself from the question.
It didn't really change anything for me in terms of design. The only thing that changed was the stories we were talking about on a given day, and so instead of the stories coming from XYZ books, they were coming from different things that I had posted to Canvas. And I would change the text that I assign anyhow, just in the spirit of sort of staying fresh and challenging myself to think about different materials and have different conversations. And so I found it pretty pretty seamless. And it's given me a model that I feel like I can use moving forward. Now that the grant motivated me to do this initial work, I find that it's something that I think I can just do moving forward, swapping out texts and looking for different canonical and contemporary stories to assign to students.
Yeah, and Miles, so like I know that you haven't had the chance to teach the courses that you converted yet, but from a design paint standpoint, it's still sort of like working through this like a schedule to craft a new syllabus. Was it still in the kind of mode of, like this week I'm teaching a graded essay, right? And so I need to find examples of that. Did the schedule and topics stay largely the same for you, and it was just a matter of finding other options to swap in?
In the case of the TLC course, which before the syllabus was organized around 3 or 4 memoirs. I have used like anthologies of essays, but it was mostly their memoirs, and the development of with affordable content material, the way I built the schedule for the syllabus, if memory serves, is around, they get exposed to far more diverse voices within a given, couple weeks than just lingering in a single text or a single memoir for say 2 or 3 weeks. So I anticipate when I teach the course with this material that our conversations and our discussions will be very different. I think that the ways in which the structures that they're going to write in or experiment in will reflect the different structures and voices that are in the discrete units that are weak, so rather than reading 3 chapters, they're going to be reading five small essays, five lyric essays, maybe a short story or 2 thrown in there, and then to build pieces in the manner of those one or more of those pieces. So that's one major change.
Right up.
We get bogged down in sometimes we'll get bogged down. I mean, because as first generation freshmen, they're not used to a university schedule, and so we lose momentum in a 300-page or 250-page memoir, where this I think will provide a lot more variety and a lot more. So I'm anticipating that.
Cool. Kevin, you mentioned Project Gutenberg. I haven't poked around there too much. I know sometimes in Project Gutenberg you're looking at like scans of books, right? But then they have like a volunteer staff that will like type out transcripts. Is that correct?
I don't know. I don't teach the scans. And I don't know how the texts I'm reading came to be, but they're on web pages, and they're often, curiously enough, from the Australian version of Project Gutenberg. That's oftentimes the one that I end up using. But in terms of who actually does the work of getting the text onto the website, I'm not sure. But I don't use the scans. I find those unfriendly and sort of hard on the eyes and not particularly accessible. And so I only use the ones where the text is actually on the web page, and they're very unadorned. There's nothing particularly glitzy about it. It's just the bare bone text on the page.
Yeah, that's more what I was hitting at, because I know that both are options, and so I didn't know if you were attempting to teach scans of an old book as well, or so you're just sticking with, which is of course also more accessible, because it's more have a happy outcome with like a screen reader or assistive technology.
Exactly.
We had a question pop up in the chat. Connie, Hi, Connie. Uh, um, uh,
I hope I answered it.
oh, well, I can just I can read it out. We can talk about it. But Kevin, I'm curious if you've talked about your students. Talk with your students about your selection process. Miles, do you plan to do this? I can just open those questions up.
Yeah, because I do. It's a great question. And I tell the students up front, we're not going to be reading these texts the way you may be accustomed or even learned how to read them in high school. We're not going to be talking about them in terms of theme or symbol or anything like that. We're going to be talking about these texts in terms of what you as a writer can learn from them. And so I say up front, I assign this text because I think it's really good example of how to think about the third person limited point of view. Or I say I assign this text because I think it's a really evocative use of setting. Or I assign this text because it's really conveys urgency in the present tense. And then we talk about how that author uses third person limited or present tense or setting or what have you. But then it's important to me that the students do some of this work on their own, because at the end of the day, I'm limited by my own aesthetic biases, my own reading history, and I want students to go out and find the work that speaks to them, and then not only read it, but think about it and write about it, which is why I have that assignment where they have to go into the library and read a book by one of the authors they've only read a single story by. And they get to pick which author and which book, but then in the essay they write about it, they talk about some craft element. So, if we read a Lydia Davis story, and Chris has Lydia Davis books available as ebooks, and so they can access them from anywhere. If we read it and talk about a Lydia Davis story, and then that story speaks to the student, and the student wants to write about Lydia Davis's use of humor, or dialogue, or something of that nature, the student's going to do it after having read many Lydia Davis stories as opposed to just one story. So yeah, I do talk about them, I do talk with the students about how I pick the text, but then I also make the students talk to me about why and how they pick the text.
I suppose in the case of the courses that I teach after discovering what I've discovered via the grant, like the ebook resources, the advanced poetry students have to develop a craft talk, and they have to find 5 books and then pick their favorite of the 5 outside of the books that are assigned. And in the assigned books that in the class, I talk about why I chose those assigned books. And if they like some element in those assigned books, I can say, well, consider these other poets. In fact, here's a list of poets that are similar. And it's a very easy way, like it's simple, but the links that I've discovered and I have from this grant have allowed me to nimbly provide lots of resources to students in the context of that craft talk.
Yeah, I love hearing that idea that these things that you're gathering, I mean, they can have applicability outside of just the courses that you're working on too. Perhaps even more broadly than might be the case in a lot of courses where you're just finding sort of the analog like intro textbook, right? And then, well, then like for the next higher up class, you've got to use a different one here, but you're discussing a lot of these same writers in different levels of courses and in different contexts. So it can have that effect where you're just sort of building that running library that you can work from. Curious. So since you're using predominantly electronic materials now, did either of you end up or consider using any audiovisual materials or video, audio, or are you just sticking right now with text?
So there's a New Yorker podcast that I like where one author reads another New Yorker author's work and then talks with the fiction editor, Deborah Treisman, about the work. And so occasionally I'll assign one of those and I'll say to the student, listen to this story, listen to Richard Ford read this John Cheever story, and then listen to Richard Ford talk with Deborah Treisman about this John Cheever story, and then we'll come to class and we'll talk about it. So I do a little bit of that, but not too much.
I have not. As far as I've not found new material from this grant. In the past, I've found authors of interest who are reading this very easy to find poets on YouTube, or various poetry centers that have archives of poets giving lectures or giving readings.
Right. So yeah, I think that's about run me through all of the questions and notes that I had. I think this has been a really great conversation because it's illustrative, both of your projects, that it, even though it might seem daunting, where am I going to find Creative Commons licensed essays and poetries and short stories? And yeah, you might not be able to, but if you're thinking creatively about the types of resources that you're looking for and how to provide access to them, that these projects of this type are just as doable as in any other discipline. So it was great to kind of hear your creative solutions to these issues. I guess as a parting kind of comment, having gone through this, having found these kind of resources, assembled these list of links, thought about sort of ways to kind of curate and build your own anthologies around these schedules, you're speaking to writing faculty who are considering these kinds of projects themselves. What would be your kind of, in hindsight, kind of best piece of advice?
Well, two things come to mind really quickly is talk with Craig, and the second, well, if I can be of help, I'll share any link library or syllabus that people want, whatever I have as far as links or lists of ebooks. I'm very happy to share that. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm M. Waggener at unoma.edu. So please email me and I'll share whatever I have.
Thanks, Miles.
Yeah, I would say, because the students are different each semester, there can be a comfort to having similarities across courses elsewhere. And sometimes one of those similarities can be the actual texts you assign. But I found it invigorating to just completely start from scratch. And did not find that when I wanted to go through some of the learning outcomes that I'd always or long wanted to go through, that I felt the worse for having different texts. On the contrary, it forced me as an instructor to articulate differently how XYZ effect was achieved. So I would say, as an instructor, it is going to be a bit more work. And so maybe it's a project to start over the summer or over winter break or something like that, when you've got a bit of a longer runway. But if your experience is like mine, I don't think that you'll find that the actual learning outcomes or objectives suffer on any level. And you might find that you're a bit more or differently engaged than you were before, because you're forced to articulate why you believe XYZ through different reading material.
Awesome. Great insight there. Thank you so much. All right. Kevin, Miles, thanks again for coming and sharing with us. I will post the recording on the events page after we're done. But have a great rest of your day. Thanks for all your work. And I'll see you around campus.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Opportunity.
Bye.